Well, hello there folks, this is Liaj and welcome to a video for Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. For today's video, I would like to do another guide on one of the playstyles that I've been using to help me get through the Sunbreak anomaly grind. Thanks to the very positive response on my previous Sword and Shield guide, I figured that there might be a fair amount of interest in seeing a few more of these videos, so let's jump into another. Now then, when discussing the different playstyles I've been using throughout Sunbreak, I can go no further without talking about what I would consider to be, hands down, my absolute favorite playstyle that I have used so far. This playstyle is one for what I would now consider to be my main weapon in Sunbreak, the Switch Axe. And let me tell you, while I'm used to experimenting with all sorts of interesting ways to play all of the weapons, if I ever want to guarantee victory on a quest, this is the playstyle I will use. I would like to dub this the Untouchable Switch Axe. Okay, now before we dive into this, I have a bit of a confession to make. This video is going to be a bit of a double dip into a topic that I have previously covered in a past video. At the core of this playstyle is the usage of the Wire Step Silkbind, which has received a whole video going over its mechanics in great detail. And I will say that I think that video is still worth a watch, as I still find myself using the same techniques that I covered in my current iteration of this playstyle. But as for the reason I am making this video, the aforementioned Wire Step video was mainly focused on the usage of the single skill, while for this one I wanted to share my full playstyle that I have refined over time, including aspects like my preferred switch skills, a few of my favorite builds, and some general usage tips that have worked well for me. And don't worry, you won't need to go back and watch any of my previous videos to understand this one. As usual for these guides, I will still cover what you need to know to get up and running with this playstyle. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, so when defining a playstyle, I usually start by focusing on the switch skills that I will be using. To sort of give a general theme to how we will be playing the weapon, my focus will primarily be on evasion, mobility, and just avoiding damage in general, hence my dubbing of this playstyle the Untouchable Switch Axe. On screen right now is the set of skills that I will have equipped on my main scroll, so I will be going over each of these skills and explaining how they fit into my playstyle. And to start, you probably saw this coming, but I want to talk about the Wire Step Silkbind. As I mentioned before, I made a whole video talking about how this Silkbind works, but in case you are coming in fresh, I will be giving an abbreviated overview for our purposes. So for starters, the Wire Step is a primarily evasive Silkbind that you can assign to the input of the left trigger plus the top face button. When we input it, we will throw a wire forward and immediately use it to jump to the side, traveling in an arc from where we started. The general idea behind this movement is that it is essentially a flanking maneuver. If we start in front of a monster, then after completing the motion, we will have traveled around to its side. So that's cool and all, but I'm now going to jump right into what makes this move special. The Wire Step is the only evasive Silkbind in the game that is actually considered to be an evade by armor skills. What does that mean exactly? Well, to give the easiest example, we can show off the Evade Extender skill. With a normal evade, this takes the distance that we travel and turns it up to 11. I mean, like, the game's basically unplayable without this skill. And so, with Wire Step, Evade Extender's effect is just as drastic. Admittedly, this is sometimes a bit too much distance, as it's pretty easy for us to overshoot our target, but in my opinion, the level of mobility we get out of this is absolutely worth it. So yeah, as you probably figured from that, any armor skill that affects your evades will also affect the Wire Step. Let me show off another important one, Evade Window. When we do a Wire Step without this skill, we will notice that we can pretty easily be hit during the move's animation. If I add level 5 evade window, however, all of a sudden we have become rather impossible to land a hit on. Admittedly, I haven't done enough testing to determine how much each level of evade window benefits us, but when I'm running with max window, it feels like nearly the entire length of the animation has become safe, and that makes it such a powerful tool to let us instantly avoid nearly any attack with a single button press. I mean, look at this, I don't even have to time the move well, and these big attacks are basically nothing to me. Now then, the final evasion modifiers we have to cover are the evasion trigger skills. These include the skills Blade Scale Hone, Adrenaline Rush, and Status Trigger. Essentially, these are all skills that will give us an effect upon successfully evading through an attack. So as you can guess by now, these skills will all activate when we wire step through things. Because we can make wire step into such a safe dodge, this gives us one of the easiest ways to consistently activate these skills. I will definitely have one or more of these in all of my builds that use the wire step. We'll get into the specifics of these later. So okay, I hope I was able to summarize what we needed to know about the wire step without just making it the whole video. The wire step is probably the most important part of making this playstyle what it is, however, so if you want a slightly more in-depth analysis of this skill, I do still have the other video. Alright, now to cover all the other switch skills that I have equipped for this playstyle. Admittedly, none of these in my opinion are as important to the general flow, but I do make use of all of them, so they do affect how I end up playing. So let's see, going in order, we first have the forward overhead slash. This is one of our normal axe attacks. It simply is a big axe chop that has us run a decent distance forward. The other move that we could swap this to fits a similar purpose, but it doesn't move us as far in exchange for having a quicker animation. Because I like to focus on mobility with this playstyle, I am a big fan of the extra movement that we get with the overhead slash. One common use I have for this move is to close the distance to the monster if we ever overshoot with a wire step. Okay, the next move I have equipped is the finishing discharge. Out of all the switch skills I've got, this is probably the one that fits the least with the theme of this playstyle. The finishing discharge is of course our big all-in attack that all switch axe users will know and love, notably enabling the always fun zero-sum discharge. Now unfortunately, because we have wire step equipped, we do lose a bit of that zero-sum payoff. Notably, if we were running the Soaring Wyvern Blade Silkbind, we could have that extra attack at the end of the zero sum that deals a bunch of extra damage and eliminates the ending lag animation that we would usually have. Still, even without the Soaring Wyvern Blade, I still like to throw in the occasional zero sum for some nice targeted damage. And guess what, if you were missing the Soaring Wyvern Blade, we can just put it on the other scroll and swap to it whenever we want it. Moving on, the next switch skill on this list is the 2-stage Morph Slash combo. This is one of the new moves added in Sunbreak, and it is one that I haven't really had a chance to talk about before. I have to say though, I absolutely love this move, and I would consider it to be a straight improvement over the old option, which of course is why I have it in this loadout. If you've played a bunch of switch acts in Sunbreak, you might be familiar with using this move, but I think I ought to provide a quick rundown of how it works, especially since I feel the in-game description doesn't do a great job in that regard. So the 2-stage Morph Slash replaces another of our regular switch axe moves. We can get to this move from the Wild Swing axe combo. After starting a Wild Swing combo with the right face button in axe mode, a press of the right trigger at any time will let us end the combo with our move. The previous option for this was a spinning axe swing that is a fine move, but unremarkable otherwise. Let's take a look at the new move now. Upon inputting the right trigger, we have this extremely slick animation that will deal out an attack and swap us from axe mode to sword mode. A fun little detail of this is that we have two possible animations depending on which side of us the axe was when we do the input. If the axe is on the left side, we will pass the axe behind our back while swapping to sword mode, which looks really cool. And if the axe is to our right, we will do an equally stylish axe flourish into an underhanded sword swing. In both of these cases, the effect is the same as we are left in sword mode and could start doing sword attacks if we wanted. However, this isn't the end of this move. If after performing one of our transitions into sword mode, we press the right trigger a second time, we will perform the namesake second stage of this move, which sees us swap right back into axe mode and perform a spinning axe swing while stepping backwards. So depending on what mode we want to end up in, we could either stop this move early and remain in sword mode, or follow through and go right back to axe mode. However, let me now reveal the main features of this move. When performing this move, the two different stages each give us a little bonus. For the first stage attack, this bonus is a free reload. If we look at our switch gauge, we can see it jump up a chunk when we swing the axe around. Even handier, we don't need to land the hit to get the reload, so we can do it at any time that we want to reload. This is especially useful because if we have low gauge, we can do this instead of a slow manual reload to get us above the threshold to start using sword mode again. Heck, the move just puts us in sword mode too, so it's just a way to get us there if we didn't have enough gauge otherwise. Now then, the effect of the second stage hit is a pretty big one. This hit is probably the most effective way to build our amp gauge. Even with a power file, we can get to max amp state with just 2 of these combos if we are in amp boost state. So yeah, overall this move just has a ton of utility and is really fun to use. I wouldn't say it's crucial for this playstyle, but it definitely earns its slot just for how good it is. Okay, last but not least, we have the Silkbind move Elemental Burst Counter. This is another of the new Sunbreak moves, and this is probably the one that received the most hype when Sunbreak was released. The thing is, this is the first actual counter that the Switch Axe received. As a weapon with very few defensive options, this was pretty huge. Of course, we also have our very good wire step now too, but this counter is still pretty awesome. So let me go over this move as well. When we input the Silkbind with the left trigger plus the right face button, we will start by holding our weapon at the ready. We can stay like this for quite a while, but as we notice, our switch gauge will drain while holding our stance. Before our gauge runs out, we can press the right trigger to fire off a quick file burst. Now this burst is the key to this counter. If an attack hits us while we are firing off the burst, we will get the counter, and it's a strong one. In addition to giving us some quite strong slashes once the counter succeeds, we are also rewarded with a free maxed amp gauge. While it might take a bit of practice to get the timing of the counter down at first, you should find soon enough that the window for it is quite generous, so it is a great option for both offense and defense. Even though I love using the wire step in this playstyle, I will also find myself tossing out one of these counters on occasion for the amp gauge boost. Alright, with switch skills covered, I now want to go over the various armor skills and builds that I've put together to take advantage of this playstyle. We will start with the skills to maximize our wire steps abilities. I find Evade Window and Evade Extender to be mandatory. I will simply max both of these out for the reasons I showed earlier. Maybe this isn't necessary for your purposes, but I like to have maximum comfort when using this move. Now then, let's cover the trigger skills that I mentioned earlier. In my opinion, there are 2 basic builds that fit within this playstyle: status builds and non-status builds. If you have a status build, then you are going to be running the status trigger skill full stop. This skill will of course activate when you successfully wire step through an attack, and once it's on, you become an absolute powerhouse for building status. The weapon may not seem like it, but the Switch Axe is actually quite a proficient status builder by default. This capability comes in the fact that you can get a status build up with regular slashes, but also additional procs from the hits from your files. So combine this with status trigger, and every swing in sword mode will give you 2 status procs, plus an extra one in both modes if you're amped, which is pretty huge. Now regardless of if you're running a status build, there are 2 more trigger skills to consider. First we have Blade Scale Hone. The skill is pretty simple. When you dodge through an attack, you have a chance to restore some sharpness. I usually don't have space to slot in more than 1 level of this, but it's of course pretty handy to keep your weapon sharp if you're dodging a lot with your wire step. Usually I'll run a combo of speed sharpening and protective polish, but if you're feeling it, maxing out Blade Scale Hone could work as a viable alternative for sharpness management in this playstyle. Finally, we have Adrenaline Rush. On a successful dodge with this skill, we will gain up to plus 30 attack power for about 30 seconds. This isn't one of the hugest attack boosting skills, but it's still quite nice, so especially if you aren't focusing on status trigger, this is a very useful one to have. Okay, so now let me present 3 of my current builds that I've been using this playstyle with. I must say, none of these builds are optimized by any means. I still have a ways to go on my anomaly grind to unlock all the possible decorations, and I haven't done much of the high tier augmenting on my armor to fish for the best in slot skills. But on the other hand, this should hopefully mean that these sets should be achievable pretty early into the endgame grind for most of you, and so far I have not been let down by any of these. Alright, first we have my favorite build by far, the Ultimate Paralyzer build. The Volvidon Switch Axe is, I believe, the most effective at dealing out paralysis status. While not having the highest base para value, this one has an element file which will be outputting more para for us. And while there are also axes with paralysis files that have higher values, you are losing out on the para from the base weapon hits. For my armor, we have a mix of Gold Rathian and Risen Chameleos. The Gold Rathian of course provides us with the very useful status trigger and also some handy stuff like Evade Window and Foray. With the Risen Chameleos pieces, I am mostly going for the Build-Up Boost skill, which is a very nice 20% attack boost whenever one of our attacks triggers a status proc. In the 12-second status trigger is active, that is all of them. There is certainly some potential to get some huge damage out of this skill if we were to stack even more damage skills on it, but in my case, this is really just to put my damage up to par because this build otherwise is extremely weak. The Volvidon Axe, being incapable of ever getting purple sharpness, isn't going to be hitting that hard, but honestly, I don't care. With the amount of paralyzing I can do with this build, my damage barely matters. It is wild that I actually noticed clear times on par with my other builds even though my damage output should have been much lower. The difference here being that I can spend so much more time wailing on an immobile target. And now think, I hunt a lot solo, so imagine what this could do in a multiplayer setting. Your presence will certainly spell doom for any monster if you can keep it locked down for your teammates. And I mean, your damage still should be holding its own at the very least thanks to the build-up boost. Now once again, you can probably do a lot more with this build. My armor is only lightly augmented, so you could definitely put in some time to roll some better damage skills, and you don't also have to lock yourself into the armor pieces I chose, since there are some very late anomaly grind decorations that could give you the key skills you need. So if you're up for it, you can probably really juice up this build to become an absolute powerhouse. Okay, the next build I have here is non-status and more damage focused. Admittedly, this one probably is in the most need of an update, as I don't think the damage skills are really all that optimized. I was going for a bit of a balance between raw and elemental damage for this one. My main focus was to find switch axes with power files and purple sharpness, but I also decided to grab switch axes in each element so I can swap them depending on a monster's weaknesses. I should currently be showing the 5 ones that I picked out on screen here. For the build itself, I ended up with Agitator, Attack Boost, and Burst for raw damage, and I'm also running Adrenaline Rush for that wire step payoff. I even threw in a point of Blade Skill Hone on this one, although I still have the Protective Polish and Handicraft to preserve sharpness because only one level of Blade Skill Hone isn't too reliable. Overall, we will be having the same playstyle, just dishing out more direct damage and not getting any paras. Perhaps a build like this is worth running if you have someone on your team handling status pretty well already. Alright, the final build I have is a pretty interesting one, and I may even be finding it to be a better damage dealer than my actual damage focused build. In this build I am running with the Chameleos Switch Axe. Armor wise, this looks pretty familiar. Huh, it's the same as my paralysis build. So the Chameleos Switch Axe is a poison weapon, but it has pretty good raw damage, purple sharpness, and a power file too. Now this seems contradictory. Am I running a damage build or a status build? Well, short answer, both. Even though this axe doesn't have an element file, the amount of poison it has by default is a lot, so when paired with status trigger, we will still poison quite fast. In that case, I am happy to have a power file for more damage. Now normally I wouldn't be too excited for poison, but it just so happens we've got some synergies going on here. First, of course we have build-up boost again. That is a big damage boost given to us just because we're applying a status, and this time the axe actually hurts when we hit things with it, which means that 20% boost is even better. Next, we have the Foray skill. This skill states that while a monster is affected by poison or paralysis, we get a damage boost in the manner of plus 15 attack and plus 20% affinity, which is pretty decent. Now Foray is nice on my paralysis build, but think of how much longer poison lasts. Oh yeah, it just so happens that I also have Chameleos Blessing at level 3, which should extend the poison even more. So all of what we have together should mean we can keep a pretty decent poison uptime on the monster, which means lots of foray time, which also means more damage. Oh, and I guess the poison does damage too. Overall, this build will once again play the same and put out quite a bit of damage. For this one, if you wanted to sync up with some team members and have everyone run the foray skill, I bet you could do some pretty strong work. And there we have it. All of these builds will fit into the general playstyle I discussed, but they can provide slightly different utilities depending on the hunts you are doing. Feel free to try out some of these builds or even improve upon them with your own. For now, I think I want to round out the video with some demo clips on how I generally use this playstyle in practice. Of course, these will be wire step heavy, but I hope I can get some clips that provide some insight on how I play the switch axe in general as well. So here we go with our first demo. I'm starting things off with my lovely paralysis build, and it looks like I'm reusing content again. So it just so happened that I had a Diablos hunt in my demos for my wire step video too, but I couldn't help but hunt another one because it is just too much fun. As you may be aware, Diablos has a severe weakness to paralysis, which means that this build is going to be eating real well. But honestly, this paralysis weakness isn't even needed for this build to do its job. I just find this playstyle to be a perfect counter to Diablos because of how telegraphed its moves are. Basically, as long as we aren't stuck mid-combo, we can avoid nearly anything it throws at us with our numerous defensive options. Now then, let's cover a few of the techniques that I'm using. Rewinding to the start of the fight, the first thing I do is wire step through the roar, but you will immediately notice me chain that into a forward overhead slash. This is something I try to do as often as possible, as this is one of the better ways to close short distances after landing from the wire step. I covered this concept in more detail in the wire step video, but to summarize, when we land after doing a wire step, we will experience a small time lag before we can move again, unless we attack, which we can do immediately. Therefore, if we land a short distance from a monster, a quick gap closing attack is the best way to get us back in the fight. Moving on, we have of course gotten our first paralysis already, and I will throw out the 2-stage Morph Slash to easily max out my amp gauge. Diablos certainly didn't seem to like this and is already angry, but that's too bad because here's another paralysis. For fun, I toss out an elemental burst counter, expecting Diablos to do something upon recovering, and I am rewarded. Here, since we got a knockdown with a mount, let's try to deal some damage. To show that we don't have to give it up entirely, I am swapping scrolls so we can have access to Soaring Wyvern Blade. It might take an extra second, but now we're free to do the favorite zero-sum combo. I am trying to incorporate this more often into my play as a more damaging payoff to use during large windows. Oh Diablos, you have to do better than that if you want to land a hit. Now in this clip, I want to demonstrate that we don't have to use wire step to dodge everything. Our regular evades are still very good, and in particular, I'm fond of the quick step evade that we can do after attacking. Against quicker attacks, these are a really good option because it keeps us perfectly positioned to keep the pressure on. Also, it just feels extremely cool to dodge things this way. I try to do it whenever possible because of how slick it is. It looks like I get a chance to do the Switch Axe Wake Up tech. In case you aren't familiar, this one is pretty simple. Just drop your bombs and burst counter into them. It's not the best you can do in a single hit, but it is a free amp charge, so if you don't have a better option on your team, this one is pretty good. So I have to say, I've got so many more awesome looking clips from this single Diablos hunt, as this was a bit of a stomp. Unfortunately, I think this video is already going to be running long, so I need to move on to the next demo. Ideally, you should have seen some of my other clips repurposed into B-roll in this video, so let's check out the next hunt. For this demo, I will be running my more damage-focused build using Adrenaline Rush and this Rathalos Switch Axe. Initially, I wasn't expecting too much from this build as I haven't updated it in a while, but I was actually pleasantly surprised by a few things. First, the particular axe I have chosen has one important benefit. The level 3 Rampage slot on this weapon has allowed me to equip the Coding Switch Boost Rampage decoration. For the longest time, I had no idea what this skill did, but just recently I noticed what a big effect it has. So maybe there are some effects that I'm not aware of with this skill, but the most important thing that I have noticed is essentially, with this skill active, anytime we do a morph attack, we reload some of our Switch Axe gauge. Now you may have noticed how I do a lot of my attacking. Essentially, I just mash that morph button. With the addition of the rapid morph skill, this is a pretty effective all-purpose combo. And as it turned out during this hunt, I never had to reload my axe, and that just made this build super comfy to play. Now, another unexpected boost I got from this build came from the Intrepid Heart skill. I didn't put this skill on intentionally, but it was really nice to have. As it turns out, getting that free hit absorb is really nice when we already don't get hit much. I had this trigger a handful of times during this hunt, and really, anytime I needed it, it was ready to go thanks to how much I was able to avoid damage while also staying aggressive. Okay, I hope we got a decent bit of footage in while I was covering all this. Since there shouldn't be too much new to show here, we should move on to our next demo. But first, one more really cool dodge for the road. Alright, finally it is time to try out our Poison Axe build. Our target monster is notably pretty weak to poison, but that won't make things too much easier. It did take a few attempts for me to get a relatively clean run that would look nice in this video. I did find my wire steps overshooting the monster a lot more in this hunt, leaving me annoyingly far away. This is probably due to Risen Kushala moving around a lot, as well as its smaller size making it harder to clip its hitbox while wire stepping. Still, it's better to dodge an attack and be left far away than to have gotten hit. Once this Kushala entered Risen state, it did get quite a bit more annoying to deal with. I tried a few times to land a counter, but Kushala decided to get all flighty. Thankfully, I wasn't punished too hard for missing these ones, but it could have been worse. Once again, we should have covered most of what I'm doing in these clips though, so I think we should get ready to wrap things up. One final takeaway I think we can get out of this demo, however, is just how effective the wire step can be. Looking at a bunch of our clips, Kushala throws a lot of AoEs at us, and even with some really bad timing on our part, we are still able to completely avoid them with the wire step. So, for what I thought would be a quick video to put out, I ended up covering quite a lot. There are a lot of specifics that I didn't really go over, such as my general attack selection, most of which I did just by feel and muscle memory. Still, I hope by watching, many of you were able to get a general idea of my playstyle. It's worth reiterating that I've been playing this a whole lot and having a ton of fun with it. I hope I encouraged some of you to give this playstyle a try, and if any of you have been inspired with your own ideas, feel free to share them. So I think that about does it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Channel-wise, I think I have a few more playstyle videos planned in the near future, and I'm hoping that the next Rise title update will give me some more ideas to work with. For now, however, I just have to say thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.